The crunch of expensive running shoes on loose gravel. The crisp pre-dawn air of a neighborhood where ambition is the architecture. Then the sickening slam of a body against unforgiving pavement. It's a scene we've seen too many times, a narrative that feels brutally familiar. But what if the man gasping for breath, his face pressed into the asphalt, pinned under the crushing weight of 2 police officers in the exclusive enclave of Oakhaven Estates, wasn't just another statistic? What if he held their careers, their very freedom in the palm of his hand? This isn't just a story of injustice. It's the story of what happens when prejudice, power, and karma collide on one quiet suburban street. The air in Oakhaven Estates at 5:45 a.m. had a quality of liquid silver. It was cool, clean, and carried the scent of money freshly cut grass from automatic sprinkler systems, the faint chlorine from artfully hidden swimming pools, and the subtle perfume of blooming magnolias that lined the perfectly paved streets. This was the stillness Marcus Thorne craved. It was a stillness he had fought for, not just for himself, but as a promise that the chaos of his youth did not have to be the final word. He moved through it like a phantom, his long athletic frame cutting a sharp silhouette against the nascent dawn. His breathing was a controlled rhythmic cadence, a testament to years of discipline. In 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. It was a mantra that had carried him through law school, through the grueling nights, studying for the bar, through the brutal mudslinging campaign that had, against all odds, made him the new district attorney. He wore a simple grey hoodie, the hood down, and black running shorts. On his feet were a pair of on-cloud running shoes, a small, expensive indulgence. In his ears, a single earbud played not music, but a podcast on prosecutorial ethics. He was always learning, always preparing. His mind, like his body, was never truly at rest. He rounded a gentle curve on Pemberton Lane, the sprawling multi-million-dollar homes, silent fortresses on either side. Each one was a curated masterpiece of stone, glass, and ambition. He didn't envy the people inside. He understood them. He understood the desire for a sanctuary, a place where the world's ugliness couldn't intrude. He had just bought his own, a more modest but still significant house on the edge of this very neighborhood, a symbol of his arrival. That's when he saw it. The slow, predatory crawl of the patrol car. It was a Crown Victoria, a relic from another era that the Oakhaven PD still used for its suburban patrols. It moved without urgency, its tires whispering on the asphalt, its presence a stark black and white intrusion into the pastel morning. It matched his pace, staying about 30 yards behind him. Marcus felt the familiar prickle on the back of his neck. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a ghost from a past life. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of being hunted. He didn't change his pace. He didn't look back. To do so would be to acknowledge the game, to accept his role as the prey. He was no longer prey. He was the district attorney-elect, set to be sworn in 3 weeks. He was the chief law enforcement officer of this county. But in this moment, in his grey hoodie and his dark skin, he was just a shape in the dark. The Crown Vic's engine purred a low growl of judgment. He could feel the eyes of the officers on him, feel them cataloguing him. Black male, late 30s, athletic build. Running. Running where from what? In Oakhaven Estates, there was only one acceptable answer for a man who looked like him away from a crime. He made a deliberate turn onto Sycamore Ridge, a cul-de-sac with a small, beautifully landscaped park at its end. It was a test. If they were simply patrolling, they would continue down Pemberton. If they were watching him, they would follow. The patrol car followed. The air in Marcus's lungs suddenly felt heavier. The silver light seemed to tarnish. He stopped his run at the edge of the park, pulling the single earbud from his ear and letting it dangle. He began a series of cool-down stretches, his movements fluid and precise, a portrait of calm. But inside, a cold, familiar anger was beginning to uncoil in the pit of his stomach. The Crown Victoria pulled to a stop 20 feet away. For a full minute, nothing happened. It was a silent battle of wills. Marcus continued to stretch, refusing to look at them, refusing to give them the satisfaction. They sat in their car, refusing to get out, letting their authority hang in the air like exhaust fumes. Finally, the driver's side door opened. The officer who emerged was a man in his late 40s, with a thick neck and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl of weary disapproval. His name tag read Miller. He was a caricature of the old-school cop, his belt heavy with gear and grievances. "Morning," Miller said. The word was not a greeting. It was a demand. Marcus held his quad stretch for another beat before slowly releasing his leg. He turned to face the officer, his expression neutral. "Officer," he replied, his voice calm and even. A second officer, younger, leaner, with the name Davies on his uniform, had now exited the passenger side. He stood slightly behind Miller, his hand resting casually yet deliberately on the butt of his sidearm. "A bit early to be out and about, isn't it?" Miller asked, his eyes doing a slow, insulting sweep of Marcus's body, lingering on the expensive shoes. "I find it's the best time to think," Marcus said, his tone unwavering. Think about what Miller's question was, laced with insinuation. Getting some cardio in before a busy day. "Something like that," Marcus replied. Miller took a few steps closer, closing the distance. The air crackled. "We've had a few reports. Break-ins. Over on Crestwood." Crestwood was over a mile away. It was a transparently flimsy pretext. Marcus knew it, and he knew that Miller knew he knew it. This was a dominance play. "I see," Marcus said. "Do I fit the description of the suspect?" Miller's lips tightened into a smirk. "Funny you should ask. We don't have a description. Just reports of a suspicious individual casing the neighborhood the last few mornings." "You live around here?" "I do," Marcus said. "Yeah." Where Miller challenged, crossing his arms. "I'm not required to tell you that, Officer Marcus," said his voice, dropping a fraction, the steel beneath the calm becoming audible. "I haven't committed a crime. You have no reasonable suspicion to detain me." He had used the magic words. Reasonable suspicion. It was a phrase that cops hated hearing from civilians, especially civilians who looked like Marcus. It was a sign they knew their rights, which in Miller's worldview was tantamount to an admission of guilt. Davies shifted his weight, his hand now gripping his holstered weapon. "Look, man, he's just asking a question," he said, his voice higher-pitched, nervous. "And I've given my answer," Marcus said, his gaze fixed on Miller. "Am I free to go?" Miller's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of raw hostility. "You see, that's the thing. Your attitude. It's suspicious. You're being evasive. Why don't you just show us some ID and we can all be on our way?" "I'm not carrying any ID," Marcus said truthfully. "I'm jogging. As for my attitude, I find it's a direct reflection of the respect I'm being shown." That was it. That was the line. For Miller, it was a direct challenge to his authority, a rejection of the social order as he understood it. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. "You know what you're right. I do have reasonable suspicion." "Now," Miller snarled. "You match the general description of a prowler. You're in the area where there have been reports, and you're being uncooperative. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." The world seemed to slow down. The silver light, the manicured lawns, the silent houses. It all faded into a backdrop for this primal confrontation. The podcast on prosecutorial ethics was a distant, ironic echo. "Officer, I would strongly advise against this course of action," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Are you threatening me?" Miller barked, a wild look in his eyes. "That's it. You're resisting." He lunged. Marcus was an athlete. His reflexes were honed. He sidestepped Miller's clumsy initial grab, a move born of instinct, not aggression. But that was all the justification they needed. "He's fighting." Davies yelled, his voice cracking. He rushed in from the side. It wasn't a fight. It was a blitz. Davies hit him low, wrapping his arms around his legs. Miller, recovering his balance, drove his shoulder hard into Marcus's chest. The combined force sent Marcus staggering backward. His heel caught on the raised edge of a perfectly manicured lawn, and he went down hard. The impact knocked the wind out of him. The smell of damp earth and fertilizer filled his nostrils. Before he could even process the fall, Miller was on him, a knee digging viciously into his back, pressing his face into the soft, wet grass. Davies was struggling to pull his arms behind his back. "Stop resisting!" Miller grunted the words, a percussive rhythm, punctuated by Marcus's strained breathing. Marcus wasn't resisting. He was trying to breathe. He was trying to anchor himself in the reality of what was happening. One moment, he was the master of his universe, the future DA. The next, he was just another black man, with a knee on his neck, his dignity being stripped from him on a lawn he could have afforded to buy. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed in the quiet morning. It was a sound of finality, a sound of defeat. They hauled him roughly to his feet. Dirt was smeared across his cheek. A thin trickle of blood ran from his lip where his face had hit the ground. His shoulder throbbed with a fiery pain. He stood there, flanked by the two officers, breathing heavily, the humiliation a physical weight. Miller, flushed with victory, leaned in close, his voice a triumphant whisper. "See, was that so hard? Now for the last time. Who are you?" Marcus lifted his head. He looked past Miller's smug face, past Davies's nervous apprehension. He looked at the sprawling houses, at the rising sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose. He had fought so hard to get here, to this exact place of power and influence. He had believed he had transcended this, that his title, his education, his success had built a shield around him. He was wrong. The shield was an illusion. But he had a sword, and he was about to unsheath it. He met Officer Miller's gaze. The cold anger in his gut had now been forged into something harder, something sharper. It was the calm, chilling fury of a predator that had been mistaken for prey. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the taste of blood and earth in his mouth. "My name," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, but absolute, terrifying certainty, "is Marcus Thorne. I am this county's new district attorney, and you, Officer Miller, and you, Officer Davies, have just made the gravest mistake of your careers. For a long moment, the only sound on Sycamore Ridge was the frantic chirping of a sparrow and the ragged sound of Marcus's breathing. The words hung in the air, seeming to warp the serene morning landscape. District Attorney. Officer Miller's face went through a rapid, fascinating series of transformations. First disbelief, which manifested as a short, barking laugh. District Atter. Yeah, right. And I'm the Chief of Police. Nice try, buddy. But the laugh died in his throat as he really looked into Marcus's eyes. There was no fear there, no desperation, just a chilling, unshakable calm that was far more unnerving than any threat, the kind of calm a man has when he knows he holds all the cards. Officer Davies, on the other hand, went pale. The change in him was instantaneous and stark. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, clammy sheen. His grip on Marcus's arm loosened. He had seen the campaign posters. He had heard the name. Marcus Thorne, the reform candidate, the giant slayer who had unseated a 3-term incumbent. The face on the news, clean-shaven and in a sharp suit, was now smeared with dirt and blood. But the eyes were the same. Frank? Davies whispered, his voice a dry croak. Frank, I think he's telling the truth. Miller shot his partner a look of pure venom. Shut up, Chris. Don't be an idiot. He's playing us. But the bravado in his voice had a crack in it, a tremor of uncertainty. He looked back at Marcus, his mind racing, trying to find a foothold in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. Take the cuffs off me. Now Marcus commanded. His voice was still quiet, but it carried the undeniable weight of authority. It was not a request. Miller hesitated. Every instinct in his body, honed over 25 years of being the one in charge, screamed at him to double down, to assert his dominance. To admit he was wrong, especially this wrong, was to surrender a part of himself. I'm not taking anything off until we verify who you are, he blustered, but the conviction was gone. Then verify, Marcus, said his gaze as hard as granite. Run my name. But know this: every second these cuffs stay on me, the consequences for you become exponentially worse. You are currently illegally detaining the chief prosecutor of this county. That is a felony, and I will prosecute it myself. The word felony was a physical blow. Davies flinched as if struck. He fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking. Dispatch, can I get a check on a Marcus Thorne date of birth? He trailed off, looking helplessly at Marcus. Marcus recited his date of birth without emotion. The numbers were like stones, dropped into a deep, silent well. The silence stretched as they waited for the reply. It was an eternity, in 3 seconds. Miller stared at Marcus, a torrent of frantic calculations churning behind his eyes. He was trying to build a new narrative, a new version of the last 5 minutes that could somehow save him. He was being evasive. He looked suspicious. He ran from us. He fought back. Lies, all of them. And the most damning evidence was the small, blinking red light on his own body camera, a light he had completely forgotten was there. A light that had recorded everything. Jesus. Frank Davies breathed, his eyes wide with horror, as he too remembered the cameras. The radio crackled to life, a disembodied female voice, clinical and clear. Unit 7 be advised. Marcus Thorne is the district attorney-elect for this county. No wants or warrants. Use caution. The last 2 words were standard protocol, but in this context they sounded like a death knell. The world stopped. Miller looked as though he had been punched in the gut. The smug certainty, the The aggressive posture, it all dissolved, leaving a hollowed-out man in a police uniform. He stared at the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists as if they were venomous snakes that had just bitten him. "Get them off!" Miller hissed at Davies, his voice a choked whisper. "Get them off him now." Davies, whose hands were trembling so badly he could barely function, fumbled for the key. He jammed it into the lock, his movements clumsy. The first cuff sprang open. He moved to the second, his breath hitching. Carefully, Marcus said, his voice low. His right shoulder was screaming in pain. Davies's frantic movements were sending jolts of fire through his arm. The second cuff clicked open. Marcus brought his hands around in front of him, slowly, deliberately. He rotated his wrists, his face a mask of controlled pain. Dark red welts were already forming where the metal had bitten into his skin. "My earbud," Marcus said, nodding towards the ground where it had fallen. Davies scrambled to pick it up, wiping the dirt from it with his uniform sleeve like a servant offering a jewel to a king. He handed it to Marcus, avoiding his eyes. Marcus placed it carefully in his pocket. He then looked at his hands, at the dirt and blood on them. He looked at the smear of mud on his grey hoodie. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first sign of the fury that was raging beneath his placid surface. "Both of you," he said, his voice now dangerously soft. "Give me your badge numbers and your names." "Look, Mr. Thorne," Miller began, his tone now pleading, obsequious. It was a pathetic transformation. "There's been a misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding." "Your name?" Marcus repeated, his gaze unwavering. "And your badge number." Meekly, like a chastened schoolboy, Miller recited his name and number. Davies followed suit, his voice barely audible. "I want you to call your supervisor," Marcus instructed. "And then I want you to call the chief of police. Tell him to meet me here, at this location, in the next 10 minutes. Tell him his presence is not optional." Miller and Davies exchanged a look of pure panic. Calling the chief, Dan Brady, to the scene of a bad arrest was one thing. Having the victim of that bad arrest be the one ordering the chief to the scene was a nightmare of bureaucratic and professional horror. As Miller fumbled with his radio, his voice cracking with a fear Marcus had never imagined hearing from the man who had knelt on his back just minutes earlier, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up silently behind the patrol car. The driver's side door opened, and a woman in her early 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face and an impeccably tailored business suit, stepped out. It was Maria Flores, his chief of staff and long-time friend. She had been on her way to his house for their daily morning strategy meeting. She took in the scene in a single sweeping glance, Marcus disheveled and bleeding from the lip, the two terrified-looking officers, the open handcuffs dangling from Davies's belt. Her expression went from professional concern to ice-cold fury in a millisecond. "Marcus." "My God, what happened?" she said, rushing to his side, her voice a mixture of anger and worry. "Just a misunderstanding, Maria." Marcus said the words heavy with irony. He looked at the officers, with Oakhaven's finest. Maria's eyes, sharp and analytical, flickered to the body cameras on their chests. She noted the blinking red lights. "Are those recording?" Miller and Davies froze. "Good," she said, pulling out her phone. "Don't turn them off. Don't touch them. Don't do anything until Chief Brady gets here." She looked at Marcus's shoulder, the way he was holding it stiffly. "Are you hurt? Do I need to call an ambulance?" "No," Marcus said firmly, his eyes locked on Miller. "No ambulance, no hospital. I'm not going anywhere. This entire scene is evidence, and I want it preserved exactly as it is." He was thinking like a prosecutor. The location, the state of his clothes, the dirt on the ground, the expressions on their faces, it was all part of the case he was already building in his head. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Miller's and Davies's lives. They stood there adrift in a sea of silent condemnation as Marcus and Maria spoke in low, clipped tones. They couldn't move. They couldn't speak. They could only watch as their world unraveled. Finally, a black sedan, moving much faster than the posted speed limit, screeched to a halt. Chief Dan Brady, a portly man with a perpetually worried expression, got out of the car before it had even fully stopped. He was a political animal, a man who had survived by navigating the treacherous currents of city politics. He took one look at the scene and knew he was staring at the single biggest disaster of his tenure. Marcus Brady said, his voice strained as he hurried over. He ignored his own officers. "I came as soon as I heard. Are you all right? What the hell happened here?" Marcus turned to face the chief. He raised his hand and pointed a single trembling finger at Frank Miller. "That man, Chief Brady Marcus," said his voice ringing with cold, hard clarity in the morning air, "along with his partner, racially profiled me, illegally, detained me, and physically assaulted me. They did it while wearing your uniform and driving your car. This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is a crime, and it happened in your department on your watch." He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. "So I'll ask you the same question. Chief, what the hell happened here, and what exactly are you going to do about it?" Chief Dan. Brady was a man who understood optics. He saw the tableau before him not just as a crisis, but as a photograph that would be splashed across every news outlet by noon. The new black DA bloody-lipped and dirt-stained. 2 of his officers, one defiant, one terrified. A perfectly manicured lawn in the wealthiest part of town. It was a perfect storm of bad press, and he was standing in the eye of it. "Get them out of here," Brady snapped, not to Marcus, but to a captain who had arrived in a separate car. "Take their weapons, take their badges, desk duty effective immediately, and get them union reps. Not a word to anyone. Is that clear?" He was in damage control mode, his mind a flurry of protocols and political calculations. Miller shot a final hateful glare at Marcus as he was escorted to a different vehicle. It wasn't a look of remorse. It was the look of a man who felt cheated, as if Marcus had somehow broken the rules of a game only Miller understood. Davies, on the other hand, looked utterly broken, his gaze fixed on the ground, as if hoping it might swallow him whole. "Marcus, let's get you cleaned up," Brady said, turning back his voice, now a soothing balm of practiced concern. "We can talk at my office, or yours, whatever you need." "No," Marcus said, his voice firm. He hadn't moved. He was a statue of righteous indignation. "We'll talk here, and then Maria is going to take me to get my shoulder looked at. A private physician. I don't want the Oak Haven General ER report to be the only record of my injuries." Brady's face tightened. He understood the implication immediately. A private physician's report couldn't be lost or amended by allies within the city system. Marcus was already building a case not as a victim, but as a prosecutor. "The body camera footage," Marcus continued, his eyes drilling into Brady's. "I want it downloaded, unedited. A copy delivered to my chief of staff by 10 a.m. The chain of custody is to be documented and signed by your captain and by Maria. Any deviation, any glitch, any technical difficulties, and I will get a court order to seize the entire Oak Haven PD server as evidence in a felony investigation. This was no longer a conversation. It was a list of non-negotiable demands. Brady, who was used to being the one giving orders, could only nod. The power dynamic had been irrevocably inverted. The man he would have to work with, the man who held the fate of every case his officers brought forward, had been assaulted by his own department. It was a catastrophic failure. "Of course, Marcus. You'll have it," Brady said, his voice strained. "Listen what Miller and Davies did. It's inexcusable. They're relics. That kind of policing has no place." "Save it, Dan." Marcus cut him off, the cold fury still simmering. "Don't give me the bad apples speech. I've been hearing it my whole life. The problem isn't the apples, it's the barrel, and you're in charge of it." With that, he turned and walked to Maria's SUV, his posture rigid with pain and resolve. The door closed, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving Chief Brady standing on the pristine lawn, the rising sun casting a long, lonely shadow behind him. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. As Marcus had predicted, the story leaked. But Maria, a master of media strategy, made sure their version, backed by a no comment from the DA's office, that was more powerful than any statement, dominated the narrative. The image was the story the reformist DA, a man who had promised to bridge the gap between community and police being brutalized by the very system he was set to command. Miller and Davies, coached by a bulldog of a union lawyer named Sal Genovese, gave their official statements. Their narrative was a work of fiction, carefully constructed to hit all the right notes for a disciplinary hearing. They claimed Marcus was acting erratically, that he appeared to be under the influence, and that he made a furtive movement, which they interpreted as a threat. They claimed he physically resisted their attempts to detain him. It was a classic, time-worn script designed to muddy the waters and justify their actions. Genovese held a press conference on the steps of the police union hall. "My officers are dedicated public servants who followed protocol," he boomed, his face a mask of indignation. "They were responding to reports of criminal activity and encountered an uncooperative individual who refused to identify himself. This has nothing to do with race and everything to do with officer safety. We look forward to a full and fair investigation, where the facts, including the suspect's aggressive behavior, will come to light." Watching the press conference from his temporary office, his arm now in a sleek black sling to stabilize a sprained rotator cuff, Marcus felt a familiar wave of exhaustion and rage. He had the video. He had the truth. But he knew that in the arena of public opinion and union-protected hearings, the truth was just another weapon, and his opponents were masters of wielding it. "They're going to try and drag you through the mud, Marcus," Maria said, switching off the television. "They'll leak your sealed juvenile record. They'll claim you have an anti-police agenda. They'll do anything to make this about you, and not about them." Marcus stared out the window, his jaw tight. Let them try. The body camera footage was exactly as damning as he remembered. It was a crystal-clear first-person account of a lie. It showed his calm demeanor, his clear and lawful responses. It showed Miller's escalating aggression, his transparently false pretext. And it showed the unprovoked violent takedown. Any other man would have released the footage immediately, letting the court of public opinion convict the officers in an instant. But Marcus Thorne was not any other man. He was a prosecutor, and he was a strategist. A public shaming was not enough. He didn't just want Miller and Davies fired. That was simple revenge. He wanted something more. He wanted justice. And he suspected this incident wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a deeper disease. "Maria," he said, turning from the window. "I'm not leaking the video." Maria looked at him, surprised. "Marcus, it's an open and shut case. It will end them." "It'll end their careers," he corrected. "They'll be fired. The city will pay me a settlement in a civil suit, which I'll donate to the Innocence Project. And in 2 years, Miller and Davies will be working for some suburban department 100 miles from here, doing the exact same thing. The barrel remains rotten." He leaned over his desk, his eyes alight with a fierce, burning intensity. This wasn't just a random act of prejudice, Maria. Miller's aggression, it felt personal. It felt practiced. This wasn't the first time he's done this. I'd bet my entire career on it. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm sworn in 2.5 weeks, he said. "The moment I take the oath, I am the district attorney. And the district attorney has the power to open investigations. Not just into this incident, into anything." He pointed a finger at the screen where Sal Genovese's face had been moments before. "The union thinks this is a street fight. They're wrong. This is a chess match, and they just knocked over the board, not realizing I own the building it's in." He unlocked his computer. "I want you to pull every case Officer Frank Miller has been the primary arresting officer on for the last 10 years. Every single one. Cross-reference them with any case that was dismissed for lack of evidence or procedural errors. I want to see his conviction rates, his complaint history, even the ones that were dismissed as unfounded. I want to see his asset declarations and his mortgage statements. I want to build a portrait of this man from his first day on the force to the moment he put his knee on my back." Maria's eyes widened as she grasped the sheer audacity of his plan. He wasn't just going after Miller for the assault. He was launching a full-scale internal affairs investigation run out of the DA's office into a decorated 25-year veteran of the Oak Haven PD. He was using the power they had handed him to dissect one of their own. "You're not just looking for a pattern of excessive force, are you?" she said. A slow, cold smile spread across Marcus's face. It was the first time she had seen him smile in 2 days. "No," he said. "A man that comfortable with lying on a simple Terry stop. It's not a habit he picked up yesterday. It's a lifestyle. I think Officer Miller has more secrets than just a bad temper. I think our bad apple has been poisoning this entire department for years, and I'm going to use the power of my office to find out exactly what kind of poison it is." He wasn't just the victim anymore. He was the hunter. And he wasn't just hunting for payback. He was hunting for the rot at the core of the system. And Officer Frank Miller, the man who saw him as nothing more than a black man running in the wrong neighborhood, was about to become his star witness, whether he knew it or not. The karma wasn't just coming for Miller. It was coming for his entire world. The day Marcus Thorne was sworn in as district attorney, the air in the main ceremonial courtroom was thick enough to taste. It was a cocktail of hope, resentment, and raw political tension. The ceremony itself was a formality, a procedural step. But everyone present understood it was the formal declaration of a war that had already begun. The room was a living map of the county's fractured soul. On the right pews of polished oak were filled with the city's political establishment, council members, judges, and a stone-faced Chief Dan Brady, who looked like a man attending a funeral. His gaze was fixed on Marcus, a silent, bitter acknowledgement of the new order. On the left sat the other half of the city community, leaders, activists, in simple, sharp attire, and ordinary citizens, who had canvassed for Marcus, their faces alight with a fierce, protective pride. It was a room divided, and Marcus Thorne, standing before the judge's bench, was the epicenter of the schism. When he placed his left hand on the worn leather of the Bible, he could feel the tremor in his own fingers. He steadied them. He looked out over the crowd, meeting Brady's glare, then finding Maria's encouraging nod in the second row. When he spoke the oath, his voice did not waver. It was steady, resonant, each word a vow that filled every corner of the grand wood-paneled space. His arm, now free of the sling, moved with a deliberate, almost imperceptible stiffness as he raised his right hand. The slight ache in his shoulder was a private physical reminder of the promise he was making, not just to the people in this room, but to himself. He wasn't just swearing to uphold the law as it was written. He was swearing to redefine its very application. His first act as district attorney took place less than an hour later, before the celebratory champagne flutes had even been cleared from the reception area. In his new cavernous office, which still smelled of the previous occupant, he sat behind a vast mahogany desk and signed a single document with a decisive stroke of a black pen. It was Executive Order 001. It authorized the immediate formation of a Special Prosecutorial Integrity Unit. The unit's stated mission was to investigate corruption within county law enforcement. Its first, and at the time, only official target, Officer Frank Miller. The backlash was instantaneous and furious. Chief Brady, his face beet red, stormed into Marcus's office without an appointment. "This is a vendetta, Marcus A. Witch hunt. You can't use the power of your office to settle a personal score." The police union's lawyer, Sal Genovese, was more tactical. He filed a flurry of motions to have the unit disbanded, citing a clear and undeniable conflict of interest. It was a personal attack, he argued in a press conference, an abuse of prosecutorial power. But Marcus had anticipated this. He had been playing chess while they were still setting up the checkers board. He calmly explained to Brady, and later in a formal response to the court, that the unit was structured to be unimpeachable. It was not led by him, but by David Henderson, a stoic, highly respected senior prosecutor he'd poached from the state attorney general's office, a man with no ties to Oakhaven, and a legendary reputation for incorruptibility. Marcus would recuse himself from any final charging decision regarding his own assault. Every motion Genovese filed was methodically considered and one by one denied by the courts. The hunt was on, and it was fully legal. For weeks the unit worked in the shadows, a ghost organization operating out of a secure, windowless office in the courthouse basement. They were Marcus's scalpels, a team of 4 obsessives driven by a singular purpose. Henderson, the unflappable leader. Peterson, the forensic accountant who saw stories in spreadsheets. Chen, a brilliant young investigator who could conjure digital ghosts from erased hard drives. And Maria, the operational hub coordinating their efforts and acting as the sole conduit to Marcus. They began to dissect Frank Miller's life with a terrifying surgical precision. What they found was not just a rotten apple. It was a sprawling, cancerous root system that had metastasized deep within the Oakhaven Police Department. The first thread Peterson pulled was Miller's finances. He spread printouts across a large conference table, a sea of numbers and names. For a public servant with a base salary of $92,000, Officer Miller lives a life of quiet luxury. Peterson explained, his tone dry as dust. He pointed to highlighted lines. He has a 30-foot boat, the Thin Blue Line, docked at the marina. 2 investment properties, both beachside condos, are held in a series of nested LLCs registered to his wife's maiden name. and he's paying full tuition for 2 children at an out-of-state private university, totaling over $120,000 a year. Peterson then showed them the deposits, cash, always cash made in amounts just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, funneled through 3 different banks. The second, more sinister thread was unspooled by Chen from a decade's worth of case files. "There's a pattern," she announced one evening, her screen glowing with a complex timeline she had built. "Miller has a statistically improbable habit of being the first responding officer to a specific type of B&E. She listed them: high-end electronics stores, jewelry boutiques, art galleries. In almost every case, the frantic owners report an initial inventory of stolen goods. Miller takes the report, but by the time the official log is filed, the value of the missing items has shrunk. The difference, she said, looking up at Henderson, is chalked up to owner confusion or fenced before recovery. But the discrepancy averages 30%. Miller wasn't just a cop. He was a thief with a badge using his position to skim from crime scenes. The full picture was even uglier. Miller was running a sophisticated shakedown racket. He and a small, trusted crew of other officers would have associates burglarize a targeted business. Miller would then arrive, the calm, authoritative officer, on the scene. He'd subtly intimidate the distraught owners, suggesting that for a security consultation fee, paid in cash off the books, he could provide special attention and ensure their business wouldn't be hit again. Most paid. It was simply the cost of doing business in Oakhaven. The few who refused found themselves buried in citations for petty code violations, or saw their insurance claims mysteriously tangled in bureaucratic red tape. The final devastating thread that would tie it all together was a man, Officer Chris Davies. Davies had been Miller's partner for 18 months. He was young, drowning in a mortgage for a house he couldn't afford, with a new baby and a terrified wife. He was utterly pathologically afraid of Frank Miller. He was the weak link. Marcus knew he couldn't approach Davies himself. That would be witness tampering, a rookie mistake Genovesa would pounce on. The task fell to Henderson. He paid Davies a visit, not at the precinct, but at his small, tidy home on a Tuesday evening. No threats were made. No deals were initially offered. Henderson, exuding a paternal calm, simply laid out a series of glossy 8x10 photographs on Davies's polished dining room table. Photos of Miller meeting with known fences in dimly lit bars. Bank statements showing the intricate web of cash deposits. A timeline of the burglaries perfectly cross-referenced with Miller's and Davies's patrol schedules. "Your partner is going down for racketeering, Officer Davies," Henderson said, his voice a calm, matter-of-fact death sentence. "That's a RICO charge. 20 years minimum in a federal penitentiary. Now we know you weren't the architect of this. But you were there. You drove the car. You filed supplementary reports that you knew were false. That makes you a co-conspirator." Davies stared at the photos, his face ashen. He could hear his baby crying in the other room. Henderson slid one last document across the table. It was a single sheet of paper with a grainy, time-stamped surveillance photo. It showed Davies his own face, clear as day, accepting a thick white envelope of cash from Miller in the precinct parking lot 2 weeks prior. "That's your cut from the jewelry store on Elmore," Henderson said, softly. "Conspiracy to commit extortion. Another 10 years. He paused, letting the crushing weight settle on the younger man's shoulders. "Here's the choice, son. You can be a witness for the prosecution, or you can be a defendant alongside him. You have 24 hours to call my office." Henderson stood up, leaving the photos on the table, a testament to a ruined life. "I suggest you talk to your wife." The call came in 17 hours. Davies, his voice breaking over the phone, had flipped. He gave them everything. Dates, names of the other officers in Miller's crew locations. And most importantly, he told them about the ledger. A small black notebook Miller kept in a climate-controlled storage unit, detailing every score, every payoff, every victim. It was the smoking gun. The arrest was quiet and surgical. 2 stoic investigators from the DA's office, not Oakhaven PD, apprehended Frank Miller as he walked out of his front door at 6 a.m. He was on his way to the gym full of smug confidence. They didn't slam him against a car. They didn't put a knee on his neck. They simply flanked him. "Frank Miller," one said, "you're under arrest." The click of the handcuffs was a small, precise sound in the morning air. His wife watched from the doorway, her face a mask of horrified disbelief as her world crumbled on the perfectly manicured lawn. The final confrontation took place not on a street, but in the sterile, windowless confines of Interrogation Room 3, in the courthouse basement, Marcus's territory. Miller sat at the metal table, his face grey and slack. His expensive workout clothes replaced by a baggy orange jumpsuit. His union lawyer, Sal Genovese, sat beside him. His usual bluster replaced by a grim funereal silence. He knew the game was over. The door opened, and Marcus Thorne walked in. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He was wearing a simple dark grey hoodie, almost identical to the one he'd worn that morning on Pemberton Lane. He held a ceramic coffee mug, and he moved his shoulder with no stiffness at all. He looked healthy, powerful, and completely terrifyingly in charge. He didn't sit. He stood looming over the man who had knelt on him. "Officer Miller." Marcus began his voice devoid of triumph. It was cold, factual, the voice of a man reading an autopsy report. "You are being charged with 16 counts under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, 12 counts of evidence tampering, extortion, and receiving stolen property. Your partner, Officer Davies, has given us a full confession and will be testifying against you. We have your financial records, surveillance photos, and of course your ledger. Mr. Genovese has seen the evidence. He knows you are going to be convicted. The only question now is whether you spend the rest of your natural life in federal prison or if you get a deal." Genovese started to speak a reflexive, defensive noise, but Marcus held up a hand, silencing him without a glance. "I'm not talking to you, Sal. I'm talking to him." Marcus leaned forward, placing his hands on the table, his face just a few feet from Miller's. The air crackled. "Here's the deal, Frank. You give us the names of every other officer in your crew. You detail every crime you covered up, every dollar you stole. You help us purify your department, and we'll recommend a sentence of 7 to 10. You stay silent, you protect them, and I will personally prosecute your case. I will use the full power of this office to ensure you die in a federal prison." Miller stared at him, his eyes finally igniting with a desperate, impotent hatred. The fear was burning away, leaving only pure rage. "You did all this. All this," he spat, his voice a raspy whisper. "Because of one morning. Because you got your feelings hurt." A flicker of something, not a smile, but a shadow of one crossed Marcus's lips. He stood up straight and took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice a quiet marvel of condescension, perfectly mirroring the tone Miller had used on him that day. "You think this is about my feelings? You think this is revenge for you tackling me? You've convinced yourself that you're the victim of an overly sensitive liberal with a grudge." He shook his head slowly, a gesture of profound pity. The tackle wasn't your crime, Frank. It was your mistake. Your crime was being a corrupt, dirty cop for 2 decades. Your crime was preying on the people you swore an oath to protect. Your mistake was that your prejudice, your bigotry, made you sloppy. You looked at me, and you saw exactly what you wanted to see, a black man. You could bully a nobody, you could push around without consequence. You didn't see the one person on this earth who had just been handed the power and the will to pull on the one loose thread that could unravel your entire pathetic criminal life. He placed the mug down on the table with a soft final click. You did this to yourself, Frank. Your hate was a blindfold, and you were too blind to see the cliff you were sprinting towards. Marcus turned and walked to the door without looking back. The karma that had finally arrived for Frank Miller wasn't a sudden lightning strike of fate. It was a slow, meticulous, and total demolition of his life. A demolition that had been triggered by his own hand on a quiet suburban street when he decided to tackle the wrong man. He hadn't just assaulted a jogger. He had assaulted the very system he thought he controlled, and that system in the hands of Marcus Thorne was now going to crush him. So was this just a story about revenge? Or was it something more? Frank Miller's downfall wasn't caused by the tackle itself, but by the prejudice that led to it. His inability to see a man and not a stereotype was the critical error that exposed a lifetime of corruption. It's a powerful, chilling reminder that the biases we hold can blind us to the truth, making us the architects of our own destruction. This story shows that sometimes the most effective form of justice isn't a quick punishment, but a slow, deliberate unraveling of every lie. What did you think of Marcus's strategy? Was it justice, or was it a calculated vendetta? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of intricate karma and gripping real-world drama are what you love, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more content just like this.